Tony is the executive director of the Reverse Logistics Association. In 2016, Tony took over Reverse Logistics Association and became the executive director and publisher after 12 years of active involvement on their advisory board and on committees. In his 35 plus years in the consumer products industry, Tony has held various positions, including 15 years in returns management at Philips. During his Philips years, Tony developed new reverse logistics strategies, implemented many new return initiatives. He worked with retail partners and industry groups on best practices that are still being used today. Tony then became an evangelist for improving the customer experience to reduce returns and their associated costs. Today, Tony is considered a subject matter expert in reverse logistics and speaks for the industry at conferences all over the world. So what the idea for today is, we're going to have Tony 35, 45 minutes, Tony presentation. Tony, you prefer to have questions in between? You prefer at the end?
Questions right through.
Right through, perfect. So with that, I would like to turn the controls over to Tony, and welcome to the FANG Transport Industry Group.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. And I appreciate Jim reaching out to me. I think the connection came through Tom Valentine and others in the industry, because the good and bad is there are a lot of returns and reverse logistics that need to be addressed. The bad news is not many people are addressing it. And I learned this the hard way. And I have some particular connections to the finance world to get through during this discussion. And but first off, yes, there is an e-commerce hangover to the boom of 2020 and going beyond. And again, as Michael alluded to on this particular Prime Day, as I think about all the packages going forward and how nobody really thinks about the packages that will be going in reverse. And from a finance view, there's some interesting aspects of this, but we'll get to them. First off, yes, I'm the executive director for the Reverse Logistics Association. It really is a thing, but the only one out there trying to focus energy and attention on this, the hangover of all this growth in business. And there's a phone number. We're based in Atlanta. There's a website that's very easy to find, rla.org. We are a member-driven global trade group for return solutions, and our community is free to join. So with that said, let's talk about the cost of retail returns, these reverse logistics, and how bad is it? Well, it sounds relatively nice and easy, because if you make it easy for people to shop online, or if you create a world pandemic and everyone has to begin shopping online, we've seen that drastically change. They will, and then returns will be more like 25 to 35% of sales versus 8 to 9% in actual stores. These are conservative numbers, folks. The nightmare of e-commerce could be a lot bigger than we understand. There is a ticking time bomb to this multi-channel retailing world that we're in now. Some of the surveys have been done that indicate a lot of people find it difficult to return goods purchased online. 30% of them say that, and 51% think it's too complicated. 46% find dropping off a parcel inconvenient. And in the last year, they found it dropping off a parcel frightening because of COVID and because nobody really understood whether it was on the box, whether it stayed on the box, whether it was on the door handle you opened up. So dropping a parcel off was not real convenient in the last year. 58% or probably more don't ever want to pay for a return. That's become the competitive sledgehammer. 25% of the consumers are serial returners. They return their goods more than 10% of the time. These are scary statistics. And for financial people, I know you need to really think about what these numbers mean to your companies. 24% would like to return it to a post office. 12% would be willing to take it to a retailer store. That's pretty low. 38% of the people want a delivery company to collect it from our homes. And again, those are scary numbers because nobody wants to send a truck to pick up things. 17% are okay dropping it off at a store, but here's the bottom line. 83% of consumers would shop more at a retailer that made the returns process easier. And now it's as easy as clicking from one site to another until you get the policy that you want. Online returns are big numbers. They were in 2019, and of course, they're bigger in 2020. We're waiting for some little more in-depth accuracy, but electrical products tend to return at about 10% rate, homeware at a 10% rate, furniture. This one's frightening, and we'll talk about what's happened as a result. Furniture, 15% of the time, people are returning. Health and beauty, returning lipstick, returning shampoo. It's a little bit crazy. Sports and travel equipment, 15%, and there's the nightmare. At least 25% of fashion is being returned, including international. And those are scary statistics. And the numbers, again, that's 2019, before the pandemic kicked in and before returns and e-commerce really kicked in. But what's happening is people are starting to understand the returns cost. No one really looked at it holistically, and that's what I had to learn to do at Philips. We will talk to those stories, but the cost of shipping paired with the time, the administration of preparing the goods for remarketing, because you need to do something with them, it erodes your margin. And you've got numbers like 19% of the shoppers admit ordering multiples of the same item to decide at home. Why is that? This has dramatically changed in the last year because where's the dressing room now? It's not at the back of the store, it's in your living room. The dressing room now is in your own home, and so you will order multiples. 30% of the shoppers admit to over purchasing because they expect to return unwanted items. We'll talk. It could be colors, it could be sizes, it could be a lot of things. 33% of the retailers now admit increasing prices to counter the rising returns volume, and 31% said managing these processes is impacting their profits. Before we go there, let's talk about this from a financial view. I come primarily from 5 years at Sony and 25 years at Philips, manufacturers. And we love passing the buck because we hated taking stuff back. So what happened in our world is we believed in taking back everything to protect the brand. Allowances were anathema to us. We did not like taking an allowance program and negotiating that. We like taking our own products back and being responsible for them, especially if you might remember stories on 60 Minutes about Philips and how some of our returns were found in landfill wasteful piles in other countries like Nigeria. You don't ever want to get caught as a company finding your product hazardous waste being exported around the world and have your name show up in those landfills. So we took things back. We wanted to protect our brand and we wanted control. If we were going to dispose of something or recycle it, we wanted it to be from us. I don't know how many of you in the financial world have the experience of negotiating an allowance, a liquidation, and have an anonymous source tip you off that those cases you thought that you had liquidated for destruction are actually in a warehouse in Toledo, Ohio. And that's how we found 80,000 cases at one point with the Philips brand on it that we had paid for them to be destroyed and they weren't. I mean, those are some of the small nightmares that occur. But as we get into the rest of the story about the returns industry, I just want to point out my love-hate relationship with the finance world. It's a love-hate relationship because you take a guy who was a sales guy, basically, and in 1998, 99, Philips said, you know what, Tony, go fix the returns problem. At the time, the company was about a $2 billion North America consumer electronics company with about 11 to 12% returns. You can do the math. And every month I had to stand in front of a CFO and explain, how come we have so many returns? The engineers would beat me up as well, not just the finance world, but the engineers would beat me up and say, why are you taking things back that are not defective? That's one of the holy grails of our industry, that we take things back that aren't defective. The financial implications were we were taking stuff back without any rules or regulations. So we would be taking things back that were 2 and 3 years old. And the financial world didn't understand you had to adjust those costs. So we were still operating at landed costs of those products for 2 or 3 years ago, when after that replacements had come in at lower costs. So I'm trying to describe the beginning of a total nightmare that was out of control at Philips. So it took a lot of work to figure out how to get that 11 to 12% number down to about 4 to 5%, which I did. And I did that within a 4-year period. So it's no wonder that Philips kept me around for a long time, long enough to work out retirement with them. And then they joined the RLA. So I guess they retired me and they decided what I did was important and good, and they stayed with me and continued to use us. But the financial aspects of this, as we get into some of the solutions and some of the problems, the financial aspects are returns tend to be out of control. If you don't have strong policies in place as a manufacturer, reasonable policies that you have to negotiate with the retailers on, because everyone is trying to pass the buck to the retailers and make the retailers get rid of this stuff. And so manufacturers are now in some cases, they've been doing allowance programs in lieu of return, allowance for credit amount, because from the financial world, it's a fixed amount. You can live with it. You can live with the 3% or 4 or 6% allowance. As long as it's a fixed number, the financial world depends on predictable numbers. So when returns became unpredictable, as they did in the late 90s, early 2000s, it really affected financial reporting for many corporations, especially the higher ticket corporations, the Dells, the HPs, the Philips, the Samsungs. So reporting numbers that varied seasonally, by month, by day, by week, it was out of control. So we were able to establish at Philips several rules that I, because of my background, understood. If you go to a Walmart or a Target or a Costco and you say, we need to stop your returns, you're going to lose business. And so there's a massive disconnect there between how do you negotiate a returns program that's reasonable with the 800-pound gorillas. And that was fun. But you know what? At the end of the day, I learned that the retailers, the Targets and the Walmarts and Costco's of the world, they don't want to take things back either. They were taking things back not because they sold bad product, but because the policies that they had enabled consumers to bring things back easily. And from the manufacturer's side, we were making products that were not that easy to use and complicated. And consequently, people brought things back because they had a bad experience. And at the end of the day, that's what it was about. So in around the year 2000 with Philips, they assigned me a partner, a finance controller. And to say that we went up against each other head to head is the least of the descriptions. They literally put us in a room and made us not come out until the blood was wiped up a little bit. So because again, finance, there's actually an article in RL magazine, finance is from Mars and reverse logistics is from Venus. So it was easy to beat up on reverse logistics people and explain to the CFO every month, why do you have so many returns and why are the returns so high? So let's talk. And by the way, we came out of it bloodied, with the finance director understanding much more about operations, and he was promoted into a COO role. And I came out understanding a lot more about explaining end-to-end cost of returns. It's not just the product. It's so many touch points, But here's the number one return in the retail industry, especially related to e-commerce. We are trying to sell things to all of you on a computer screen. It's a two-dimensional depiction of a three-dimensional product. You don't know what it really looks like. You don't know what it feels like. You don't know how it fits in your hand. You don't know how it fits on you. And there's so many unmet expectations. I used the example, compliments of Dr. Michael Galbraith from the University of Tennessee, who studied on social research and realized if you showed your clothing with models, your returns were much higher than if you showed it without a model. Why? We order clothing, we order shoes, we order a lot of wearables. We get them in a box to our home, we put them on, we stand in front of a mirror, and we never look like that model. Or almost never. I never look like that model. So you tend to return things because it didn't meet your expectations, and your expectations are set by what you see on that computer screen. So unmet expectations are the number one reason for returns. And I have evidence to back that up. I'm one of the first people that actually understood you need to survey consumers. Why are they taking things back that the engineers say there's no technical failure involved? And so we did. We actually surveyed using university students. The University of Nevada complied with us. We provided Target gift cards. If the consumer was willing to talk to the student said, we're doing a test, a program. Would you be willing to listen? And we asked them the questions. We were able to identify those people by serial number tracking of the product at the point of sale, when it came back to us, and the call center. All of those touch points connected. We were able to identify some consumers who had returned things. And the number one reason wasn't that it was defective, wasn't that it didn't fit, wasn't that it didn't connect with other things. It was unmet expectations. Now that's a catch-all. But I learned the same number that Accenture brought to us a year or two later when they wanted to do consulting projects. McKinsey bragged about that as well. But it really relates to, what do you tell the customer on the screen or in the store, on the package, that this thing is going to do? And can it do it, or can you do better? You have to exceed expectations. So unmet expectations, 76% of the consumers said it didn't meet my expectations. A lot of that now, we add the issue of bracketing. As I said, people are buying extra sizes, extra colors because, is it Kelly green? Is it forest green? What do those colors mean? I remember learning from Sherwin-Williams, somebody that was paid $200,000 a year back 20 years ago just to come up with color names, just to evoke some sense of what's the color. Same thing on your website. You think things are Kelly green versus forest green. You have an idea of what it means. You get it, and it doesn't quite look like that. So colors, sizes, seasonal variations, right? You buy a winter coat, it's February, and suddenly winter goes away. You send it back. And again, the use of models. Another major factor in returns is their ease of use. We used to get a lot of clock radios back in the 90s, Philips, in early 2000s. We also had the Magnavox brand, by the way. So Philips is a known brand selling in the large retailers. And when you get clock radios back and you plug them in and they work, you're like, what's the problem here? Problem is, we opened the box, the instructions were on a little tiny piece of paper, maybe 8-point font, and they were in 12 languages. And people just couldn't figure out how to use this stuff. And that drove returns crazy. And we learned you needed quick use guides. You needed a welcome message. You needed big pictures, big letters, and you need it in their native language. And we learned that, and that helped reduce our returns. Interconnectivity. The last product in is the first to go back if it doesn't work with your computer, with your system, and things like that. So those are some of the issues that are out there, some of the relief, some of the solutions that we found. Things like serial number tracking. I mentioned the fact that our products at Philips, of course, Generally Electronics generally had a serial number on it, which could be captured at the point of sale. Now, it's a little more challenging these days with fulfillment because they don't tend to capture serial numbers. They tend to scan the UPC, but those that can capture the serial number. So if you tried to return something to Walmart or Target and the model number came up in their system and it told them to scan the serial number, they scan the serial number, it would identify the day and date and location of where that product was sold. So now the Walmart returns clerk, who's the most stressed out and underpaid individual out there, would say to you, I'm sorry, but you don't have a receipt. This product was sold more than a year ago and we can't take it back. Or we can say this product was sold 6 months ago at Kmart or Target or Costco, another retailer, and we can't take it back. So we gave the retailers ammunition with the serial number tracking. We pushed for accurate marketing of the products. We tended to understand that whatever you said the product would do is what people would expect. And then dispositioning decisions became an AI process. In other words, if you as a manufacturer take things back, you need to think about what can I do with this product to get the highest revenue recovery? And those decisions were manual for the best part, but it eventually became AI. So you knew that if you were getting too many of these, you could sell them on eBay, or you could sell them at Big Lots, or you could sell them in a secondary marketplace. And those financial recovery numbers would help you decide where to go with those products. And that's when I learned a lot about asset recovery, and financial decisions had to be based on the current market value of those products, not what it landed for. And that's when we realized you can't take things back forever. You need an approved model period, and we put that into place. But the secondary market has been a big boon in the last few years. Manufacturers are doing it themselves directly. There's many second-tier retailers. I mentioned a couple, Big Lots, the dirt cheap stores, places like that. And then some have even gone direct to consumer with premium name brands like the Real or the Good Goods. A little bit of redundancy there, but it's a secondary market that's actually helping to sell these products. So there's a list of some solutions, but let's talk about, this is what the real world looks like in returns. Actually, this is a good example of the returns world. These are fairly organized in pallets. You can even see that they took time to shrink wrap the suitcases here that have been returned. But in some cases, you can see product maybe not in boxes, some wrapped, some unwrapped. This is a clean example of a returns facility that gets a lot of returns. Michael, I've been running through this nonstop. I don't know if questions have come in, if they're typing them up or anything like that, but I can just pause there briefly in case. And if there's nothing else, I'll continue on. I got a few more slides.
I had a question.
Sure.
What are we looking at here? As obviously return center, would this be a retailer's return center? Would this, I mean, it almost looks like a 3PL's return center.
It is more of a 3PL return center. That's correct. It is amazing to visit retailer return centers and watch the speed at which things get processed and put into a location based on a UPC code that lines it and sends it maybe to the Phillips section or the Donna Corinne's clothing section, or various sections of a retailer's location. And then depending on their agreement with the manufacturer, it either goes back to them or it's liquidated after a certain point. So that's an example of a 3PL center.
Tony, does this become I beg your pardon, does this become another line of business for a 3PL, in the sense that, where they would couple it with, bundle it with transload, with cross dock, with those other facilities? This would just be another facility for these?
This would be an example of another facility, but let me say it quickly. There's no one silver bullet that takes out all of these issues. There are multiple ways to process these things. And that's why I mentioned the dispositioning via AI. It helps make the decision for the 3PL. What should I do with this stuff? Now, here's where you've got competing goals. The retailer's goal is to get rid of this stuff and get an allowance for it and make sure that they're not losing money. The 3PL is trying to buy it for pennies on a dollar so that they can turn around and collect more on it. The allowance nightmare is, in my experience, those of you who have negotiated allowances for your companies as a manufacturer with a retailer. I'll ask this question in general. Did you ever have a retailer come back and tell you, you know, you gave us a 5% allowance for last year's returns, and we actually got more than we needed. We're going to give you some back. That never happened in my 25 years at Philips. What happened is the other way. 2020 gave us a 5% allowance. You know what? We actually needed 6%, so we need some more money back. And by that time, the CFOs have very often been promoted into another position because they were so accurate on their predictability on that year that you had the allowance programs. But allowances, generally speaking, are not a sustainable program. The other one, as you look at this stuff that's not real sustainable, is now there are retailers telling people, you know what, we don't want the stuff back. You keep it, we'll give you a refund. Another model that's not sustainable. Those costs are being passed back to the manufacturer, of course. Manufacturer ultimately has to absorb those. And somebody in the financial universe decided that, you know what, if you take, I'll give you an example. Wayfair ships us a little set of doggy stairs to get up to a high bed. It's a $40 item, and their financial wizards said, you know what, the cost of taking that back, the freight to get it back, the pennies that we'll get on the liquidation, it's not worth taking it back. Just give them a refund and we'll charge the manufacturer back. That is not a sustainable model at all.
We did get a question.
Yeah.
We did get a question in from the chat, and I would encourage anybody, who has a question, if you'd like to just chat it over to me, that will be fine. And I'd also encourage everybody to put your contact information into the chat. The question, Tony, is with the inventory shortages experienced by retailers and manufacturers, are we seeing returns repackaged? Oh, I lost the question. There we go. Are we seeing returns repackaged and sent back to point of sale locations instead of shipping off to foreign countries?
Both. Again, it's going to depend on the product category. The products that are returned, and again, I have visited a lot of return centers, and you have to consider that in the world of electronics, it's relatively safe that anything that has ever been plugged in, the government rules say you cannot sell it as new. So that's a simple, that's that whole category. So manufacturers with electronics have had to figure out solutions to those because they're losing money on every return. So they're leading the world in trying to figure out how to reduce returns. And by the way, I haven't said it yet, but the key word is improving the customer experience. You have to make it so simple for them when they open up that computer and turn it on that they don't think there's something wrong with it and demand to return it. So the world of electronics, really simple. Plugged in, comes back, has to be refurbished and retested and then resold as a secondary market product, as a refurbished. And then there's good values in those products, I will say that. Let's take another category, shoes and clothes. They come back for any reason. People are ordering 10 garments and returning 8 of them. There's retailers online that encourage you to do that, especially shoe retailers. Buy them, try them on, keep the ones you like, send the rest back. We'll take care of it. They go back to a disposition return center. Very often they go back to the fulfillment center where you've got untrained people looking at these garments and looking at these shoes, making a disposition decision by holding it up, looking for stains and rips and saying, I don't see any. They put it back on the shelf as new. And I'm asking you, people are buying prom dresses in the last year, or maybe not as many, but people who do that and buy it online, they get it, they wear it a weekend, they send it back, get a full refund. Who gets that product next? We don't know. It's not dispositioned as clean. There are no rules about clothing or shoes. Now, it's very questionable as to what's the best disposition for those goods. Michael, to your point, a lot of times garments are shipped overseas to third world nations because they're being given away for pennies on a dollar. So that can wind up in Africa, the Philippines, Asia, places like that, because the freight costs are relatively low for the bulk you can package. But it is true to say that the companies who focus on what's the best thing to do, we're now seeing apparel companies focus on that. Nike, Adidas have announced take back programs. They'll give you credit if you send back a pair of shoes that you no longer use or a pair that you're unhappy with. Patagonia, North Face, now there's clothing companies that are focused on that. Now these are higher end clothing companies, higher end shoe companies. Maybe they got more margin, they can afford to do that. But regardless, they understand that they should be doing this. So let me just quickly talk about the next 5 years, because we're going into some of these other nightmares that are out there, because e-commerce is going to continue to grow. What people don't remember is that Amazon doesn't run the world. E-commerce is only about 15% of all retail sales in North America, in the US, up till last year. And then we jump started. It went on steroids, and now it's somewhere around 20% of all sales. But it's still a small percentage, because the business world can't exist if you're getting 25% back of everything you sell. But because of the brick and mortar volume, it offsets some of the higher e-commerce returns volume. So we're seeing the rates go up. We're seeing retailers being forced to offer hassle-free returns, cross-channel. A couple of new terms for you: BORIS and BOPIS. BOPIS is you buy it online, you pick it up on the store, right? A lot of us have done that probably. And then BORIS is the flip side. You buy it online, but you return it in the store. Now, retailers that are strong, like the Walmarts and the Home Depots and the Targets of the world, they welcome people to come back in the store, because it's a chance to keep the sale, to help them get something else that they want. So there's some of those things going on. But the OEMs, the manufacturers, are looking to limit their liability. They want to be more predictable. So they're doing these allowance programs. The regulations are very onerous. Hazardous materials, you got to be careful where this stuff is going. Expenses, do we need to say that they're growing? Freight costs are through the roof. The secondary market, though, is desperate for these goods, partly because there was a shortage in the new goods, right? So the secondary market was anxious to fill those needs with return goods as fast as they get their hands on them. And then brick and mortar stores are shifting to omni-channel. Those big names that I mentioned, the Targets and others of the world, they're learning to bring it back in the store, sell it in the store, sell it into their Nordstrom has Rack. Saks Fifth Avenue has off Fifth stores. So they're learning that they can make more by putting it into that secondary market themselves. You're going to see more expansion of outlet stores. Here's some other of the names: the Big Lot stores, the dirt cheap stores, online, Best Buy's trade-in program, a lot of growth of trade-ins. But in the store side, there's been no new enclosed malls since 2006, but there's been a growth in new retail environments, the outlets, the outdoor expansions, and so on. There's been a retailer OEM expansion of selling refurbished goods. Even Best Buy is able to do that now. Open box, as it were, but they've checked the product. So retailers like Best Buy are taking advantage of their strength and offering it directly to consumers. A lot of consolidation of services into a larger offering. There is growth in offshore opportunities. Again, those third world countries, or even second world countries. It can go to South America, Latin America. There's been a lot of investment of capital into the reverse space, because it looks like a better investment than banking, obviously. but it's a great frontier because it is so much of a wild west right now, and there's a green initiatives going on, giving everyone a perspective of numbers. Last year, or for 2019, the numbers 2019 to 2020, 6 trillion in retail sales, estimated 9 to 10% returns. That's $600 billion. That's bigger than Amazon or Walmart by a lot. So there's a lot of return volume being done out there that needs to be addressed. And there's nobody big, which is why there's all these alternate channels. In the secondary market, you asked, Michael, or you mentioned about the third-party solutions providers. Some of the biggest ones out there, FedEx Supply Chain, PwC, some of these other companies, none of them are really much over 3 billion in sales processing. So how are we getting to that 400 or 500 billion worth of returns being addressed? Big Lots is not that big in volume. So there's a lot of alternate channels, with return rates averaging from 10 to 15%, 50%, brick and mortar much less. But so the solutions, the products staying with the consumer. And what do they do with it, by the way? They're selling it in garage sales or pawn shops or on Craigslist themselves. Again, I don't believe that refunds, the credits without a return, is sustainable, but it is a financial answer that's being driven. The opportunity. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I
Michael.
did get a question. I got a question in the chat. Omnichannel is a great buzzword,
Yes.
but most are not. Most brick and mortar stores are not selling the same product on their website. Do you see this changing over the next couple of years, the next 5 years or so?
Yes, some of the major retailers who made the mistake of trying to be a marketplace backed away from that. Best Buy learned the hard way when they were a marketplace and they were selling goods that they didn't sell in the stores. The returns were coming to the stores, and the stores, it was sitting there because they didn't have a process to sell it. So now you've got the Home Depot and the Walmarts doing some of that online sales, but they tend to stay with the manufacturers that they have a partnership with. They're not letting third parties come onto their sites. Amazon, of course, is a marketplace, but the retail stores backed away from that omni-channel marketing of house brands. House brand's a bad term, but non-brands that they didn't carry. So they've started to cut that process off, and they may sell multiple versions of Sony products online that they don't sell in the store, but if it comes back to the store, they have an ability to sell that product, as opposed to if it was a brand name, a Zenith brand name or something off the chart, that they wouldn't know what to do with it in the stores. So now the stores are better responses. And they can still process it as a return, and it goes to their liquidation center, and it does go back to the manufacturer, or the manufacturer again has negotiated an allowance in lieu of return. So it is true that omni-channel was early on a nightmare as they tried to compete with Amazon, but now they've stopped doing that. So financial flow is a lot better, that they're not selling third-party, they're not using third-party providers on their websites by and large. So they're using, I mean, frankly, Best Buy and Walmart, they're setting up their own outlets for return goods on their own website. Certainly the HPs, Dells, Philips, and Samsungs of the world have been doing that for a while. They sell refurbished return goods themselves, direct to consumer. So there's a lot of solutions. And again, I'd argue that if you care about your brand, you want to protect it, you want to take ownership of your returns, and figure out the financial aspects of that. Again, that simple example of a 3-year-old product should not have the cost from 3 years ago. It should be competitive with today's marketplace. And the good financial people understood that, and we had to learn to explain it to the CFOs. So social sharing is growing with the marketplace. And at the end of the day, by the way, I know generally the financial community doesn't think about this as much. I'm not casting stones. I'm just saying being a good corporate citizen is not always a financial goal. How do we make it a financial goal? Well, we start to realize that we're alienating clients and consumers. Millennials love this return stuff. They love buying return goods from Nike or Adidas or Patagonia. They've created a market that millennials pay attention to. And certainly, you've seen perhaps in the news over the last couple of years, companies that were not doing this were getting blasted in the news. Companies like H&M and Burberry that were caught burning their returns products instead of finding a place to sell them. Louis Vuitton, they burned the return purses because they were afraid of that secondary market. They didn't want to destroy it. So you got to know that when you get that kind of publicity, you're affecting your brand, you're alienating clients and consumers. And that's ahead of government legislative regulations. I mentioned the one on consumer electronics, it's out there. But if the apparel industry doesn't get its act together, there's going to be regulations there as well. And would you be open to legal action? I mean, imagine the nightmare that would have happened. And this is why retailers were holding on to returns or telling you to hold on to returns. But imagine the nightmare if a retailer took things back, resold them, and somebody got the COVID virus from an article that they bought in the store. There's legal action. It may still be out there, but I think most retailers were very responsible. They told you to hold the returns, or when they got them back, they held them in quarantine until we knew that the virus was not being transmitted on clothing and packages and so on. But the bottom line is, as a financial community, you need to understand the end-to-end costs. It isn't just about the loss on individual products. It's the estimate, I think, is there's 3 times as many touch points on a return product as there is on a new product, for example. So every touch point costs. And I'll try to pause and take a breath. I can go on for hours about this. I learned the hard way because when you have to stand in front of a CFO and explain returns over and over, and with Philips being a Dutch company, it was nice in some ways, certainly better than working for a Japanese company in many ways. But the financial responsibilities fell onto each director to explain. And we have a new CFO every couple of years. And we'd have to explain all of the end-to-end holistic costs. That, along with my other particular nightmare from the finance world, was the companies that exist that tell you, we'll take all of your return inventory and give you full value for it. It's a barter program. I considered it equivalent to what Bernie Madoff did. They kept promising you full recovery, full value of your returns, but you had to take it out in trade credits, either with advertising or with hotel use or airline use and so on. And I watched Philips lose $17 million worth of inventory value to a company that took the inventory and claimed that they sold it and didn't. So there's a lot of financial lessons here. And again, that's why I've had this love-hate relationship with the financial world. And at the end, I very much walked away appreciating that aspect and loving it, because at the end, if I can get financial people to understand all of these cost factors and all of these other scams that were going on, we could get along and really work towards reducing returns, negotiating strong programs with our retailers, and taking ownership and responsibility. So at the end, Philips returns were almost to that 3% rate. I had renegotiated shipping and handling terms and conditions with every major retailer, saving the company. I mean, if you did the math, it was the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars in my 15-year career as a returns management person at Philips. And I tell you this because I think financial community has a responsibility to help the operations side. There's more money to be saved in your companies by getting a hold of your returns and doing something with them. Well, Michael, I'm paused if there's more questions, if there's other ideas that anyone wants to throw out there or ask about, I'm glad to do it.
I was fascinated by I'm not surprised. It's pretty obvious on the returns on fashion at 25%. I was in a store early during COVID when they reopened. I went into a store. Dressing rooms were closed because they couldn't
Right.
adhere to the protocols. A year later, the dressing room was still closed. Over a year later, so
Yeah.
it was you buy what you think is going to fit,
Yep.
bring it home, try it on, doesn't fit, return, do it 3 times. I think it becomes like insanity after a while. You keep trying and hoping.
Yep.
So then you go online and do it again. You get a couple, you get a few hits, the rest go back. It was incredible, an incredible, frustrating process. I can't, and I'm not a shopper. I
Yeah.
can't imagine people, who shop often putting up with that. It's just,
Now, I didn't use
it's
the
tough.
term that I use very often. What the online retailers have forced the retail world to understand is a returns policy is a competitive sledgehammer. And the retailers that grew so much in the 70s and 80s, the big box retailers, generally had a no questions asked returns policy, but they put it back on the shelf. But the e-commerce retailers realized that if they were going to steal business from the brick and mortar stores, they had to offer a very easy to use returns policy. They used to ship the return labels with the products, and then they put it on your phone and things like that. But at the end of the day, you make it that easy and they will return it. They'll order extra, they'll order more, and they will return it. And ultimately, see, those costs are buried in different silos within many companies, right? There's the transportation group, there's the sales group, there's the credit group, and everyone's writing off maybe the handling fees or the freight or the reverse margins. I mean, it's not viewed holistically by most companies. Companies tend to have silos too much. And it's why we could be successful, because I dragged everybody into the room and forced us to figure out solutions. And by the way, Michael, if I might, you mentioned that they could put their contact information in the chat box, which I'm not seeing right now, but please go to LinkedIn. Sciarrotta is not an easy name to find or to spell, but it's easy to find because there's only a couple of us on LinkedIn. RLA.org. My email's there, my phone number's there, and you can join the community like the big blue button says with a couple minutes of information about yourself and your company. We encourage it. We are the only ones out there. And after I left Philips and Philips allowed me to continue working with them, I realized how important this association is. I took it over in 2016, Michael, as you read, because it was starting to slip. I took it over because of a couple of board members. We have an amazing advisory board. Home Depot and Dell were the only ones left when I took over, and they both told me, we need this association. The world needs it. Companies need to really look at this area and focus on it. And I love getting a chance to be a hero. And I'm telling any of your attendees, anyone in the audience, any of the colleagues, you get a chance to be a real hero here. In many ways, you get to help your company, you get to help the planet. So it's a good place to be.
Tony, I signed up for RLA, and I must admit there's a tremendous amount of information there, and I get the weekly, bi-weekly emails. I would encourage the members to check out Tony's website, sign up if you can. There's just a wealth of information there, and this is such an important area, as we've heard for the past, for 55 minutes or so. So I would really encourage everybody to do it. Tony, I did get another question regarding returns. Have we seen an equal return in online grocery sales?
Groceries, different world. The grocery world tends to not be a returns world. The grocery manufacturers tend to do a swells allowance, And so they do it historically, and they've got a lot of history on how many cans will be dented, how many boxes will be bent, and they simply provide a swells allowance. So the allowance concept already existed there, so they tend to not take return groceries from consumers. They simply provide a credit. I don't know financially what that world has looked like. I can tell you about eroding margins in the apparel industry and the consumer electronics industry, but I don't know what that margin hit is looking like since the growth of home delivery with groceries has happened. I think I know there's the anecdotal stories about if you call up and complain, you get a credit for it. And that's not, again, not sustainable. But the grocery world has dealt with it for years. So a good question, but not an area of expertise for us yet. We know that auto parts come back at a high rate. We know the apparel industry is a high rate. Furniture, that's a nightmare. I mean, that's just a nightmare. Again, think about it. You order a chair online, you have no idea how it's going to feel or height wise, or if it's good until you actually get it in your home. And by then, well, take the mattress in a box. Where do you go try a Casper purple mattress and lay down on it? At least there's these, Sealy stores and Tempur-Pedic stores where you can try those things. But mattress in a box, 200 pounds of pressure to put it inside that box. If you decide you don't like it, they have a real nightmare on that one, taking it back. A real serious nightmare. And I know because some of our members are trying to deal with those things as we speak. So we do encourage it. Thank you, Michael, for the plug about the website. We're trying to be that authoritative voice. There's so many questions. What are the numbers? What's the rate of growth? Do we have enough warehouses to hold all the returns in? No, we actually don't. We have thousands and thousands of trailers out there filled with returns that have not been processed yet. So there's warehouse issues. There's labor issues. Try to justify paying people to touch return goods, which have already lost their value. It's an afterthought for most retailers and manufacturers. They just want to push the stuff out in truckloads and throw it all into Gaylord boxes and get somebody to make bids on it. And not a real sustainable model, but a very common one right now. So again, I'm honored, by the way. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate talking to as many groups as possible, but the financial world, it's so important that the awareness, the information, and knowledge is out there about returns. And it does all come down to that consumer experience, make it better. But if your only competitive edge is to say, buy more and we'll take them back if you don't like them, that's not a sustainable business model, and eventually it will catch up. And I can say that because I think about the big retailer 100 years old plus that had the words satisfaction guaranteed on their front doors, and they were called Sears, and they're kind of gone now. You just can't satisfy people by taking things back. You have to deliver a great experience. So I've babbled for quite a while, Michael. I hope we're okay on time for everyone.
We are okay. We're good. Are there any other questions, comments from the members?
Yeah, comments are welcome. I'm not a rocket scientist. I've learned some of this the hard way, and I've learned some of this from financial people and from logistics people. There's just so many aspects that play into the return space, and I've had to learn a lot of them, and I still learn more all the time. So thank you,
Hello?
Michael.
So, Tony,
Michael,
quick question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So do you see a shift maybe instead of giving a refund for product that you get a credit to use in the store later? So at least they're getting another sale. Is there a movement towards that?
No, there's a movement away from that. That's what used to happen all the time. And Target has that policy, but they put it in years ago that if you come in without a receipt and it's a current product that they carry, they don't give you a refund. They give you a store credit. And that's good. That's good practice to give a store credit. It keeps people in your store. But the online retailers have not done that. By and large, they just give you your money back. And as I said, Sharon, sometimes they give you money back without even asking for the products back. So the movement is away because consumers felt it was not very friendly, and they criticized it. They criticized it on social media, and you can't exist as a retailer if you just get hammered to death on social media about a bad returns policy, because people have so many other options. But it's a good question and a good point, Sharon. I wish they would go back to a store credit, but not to be. So thanks for that one.
Tony, thank you. Wonderful, great presentation and great sharing. And I've experienced also firsthand some of the issues that you're talking about. One thing to consider, though, you mentioned several times about unsustainability of the policy, where you actually allow, almost like promote buying several things to return most. But on the other hand, I think from the economic standpoint, if you were to consider having a retail location in the prime, in the center of the city, basically having an associate helping with that, etc., those are the costs that you're avoiding by keeping some warehouse in the middle of Kentucky, so to say, and knowing and actually having a really good process for the returns. That's important, obviously, where you're actually envisioning that, yep, we're sending those 3 pairs of shoes and 2 of them will be back and we'll process them effectively. So you would still be able to compare the costs, and sometimes the economics might actually work in the direction of benefiting that second kind of policy.
Well, but think about all of the touch points and the costs involved. If you're a brick and mortar shoe store and you're selling shoes and you get about you don't get returns basically with brick and mortar shoe stores. By and large, people are trying them on, walking out the door and keeping them. Online, they know they know it may or may not fit. So they're ordering extras. So you ship them out, and you're paying shipping out for multiples. You're going to pay shipping back. You're going to have to mark them down to get rid of them. Potentially they can go back as new, but you also are going to have to pay, and especially in the last year, you're going to have to pay to have those shoes sanitized, disinfected, cleaned potentially, and then put them back into the shelf. Can you sell them again as new? Probably, if you do all of that, but possibly not. So that you've suddenly incurred all of these other scenarios where your costs have increased. So if your margin, even if your margin's 70%, you've now incurred more costs that affect your margin. You can still afford to do it, but you're affecting your margins. As one of the slides said, the retailers are admitting now that the margin erosion is affecting their profits.
Right, Tony. Yeah, no, thank you. I completely understand it. What I was saying is basically, but you're saving on not having to have a retail store and on the Fifth Avenue or somewhere else by, like, if you do not have that retail location, like now you have avoided all the costs of operating warehouse and associates, etc., by switching there. So, but I get your point.
Well, there's another option too, Igor, that's out there. Companies like Happy Returns. They process everybody's returns in a mall location that's convenient to get to. So you as a manufacturer of shoes can say, you know what, could you take those shoes back there, drop them off, and they'll take care of them. And there's some consolidation that happens there, as well as the interactive experience that maybe they can address something for those people. So I agree with you, retail space in Fifth Avenue is not a good option, but there's some other solutions now as opposed to shipping them all the way back. And the consolidation effort is underway. Happy Returns, I think they got bought by eBay or somebody big because they were clearly a good solution going forward. So thank you. You're right. There are other options besides having only retail stores, and hope to see more of those. So thanks for that. Okay. All right.
Got a comment from Roger. Roger indicated great presentation. He worked for the Wiz, so he endured your challenge from the retail side. So yes, he really appreciated that. The other side of the coin here, and
yes,
what you went through.
I did.
And any other questions? Rodney wants
Hello,
to know
Mike.
if you do like CFOs now.
No, I don't like CFOs yet. I like financial directors because they're hands-on and they usually get it faster than a CFO, especially about that barter nightmare. It is so hard to explain to a CFO, you're not really getting retail value for this shit. You're getting a promise of a credit for retail value that I mean, $17 million worth of inventory lost at Phillips. It was horrendous. So, no, I'm not as connected with CFOs these days, but I love the financial community below them. They help me interpret the language that's needed, and I do appreciate financial directors now. So I thought I heard someone else start to speak up. Maybe question?
Yes, this I don't know if you all can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, beautiful. So, Tony, this is Anant Subramanian. I've been a FANG member for the last few months and completely empathize with the stories you related on the return side. My question to you, without being too overly long-winded, is that if one were a manufacturer of a fast-moving consumer good going forward, or perhaps a manufacturer of an expensive good going forward, what are appropriate strategies to use, especially from a finance director standpoint? I'm a finance director, so hopefully I'm on your good side. I mean, and I heard some of the ideas you mentioned with that expensive purse manufacturer. Do people consider removing the tag that indicates the premium brand and replacing it with a brand that's more of an off-market brand that preserves the brand equity of the premium brand? What are ideas that a finance business partner should think of when they partner with their commercial colleagues in modeling and thinking about fast-moving consumer goods versus expensive goods?
How much longer do we have? I have so many stories. I could give you examples for well, they're gone now, but Sears, Craftsman return tools, you could return them for life. They would burn off the name and ship them to South America. Sell them as, hammers and tools without the Craftsman name. That was one approach. Another approach, HP did that as well, by the way, with their computers. They would remove their name, their software, sell them offshore. Marketing, creativity extended to if you had to liquidate a return, you could sell it as refurbished to your employees on an employee sale, and there's a good market for that. And you might accidentally let that employee sale information get out to the general public on websites like Fat Wallet that's out there. And you'd find ways to sell a ton of product at a price that you wanted, as opposed to liquidating it into the marketplace. So right off the fingers there's three quick and easy, down and dirty ideas. And by the way, that idea of refurbished liquidation, if you had new goods that were end of life and you couldn't get rid of, you could also just put those on the internet with a refurbished model number and surprise people. Sell them a new product, ship them a new product. They were ecstatic. I mean, you got something for it more than liquidation. And that's what the finance directors that I became friends with understood. They're like, so we call it refurbished, it's really new, but if we get 90 cents on a dollar instead of 20 cents on a dollar, that's a good financial decision. So there's a lot of tricks up the sleeve, and you don't tell the CFO first all the time, but if the results show you're successful, then that's what matters. I will tell you another experience. We had 150 liquidators at Phillips waiting to buy our return goods. It drove pricing all over the map. It was crazy. When we reduced to 15 key partners, we actually increased our asset recovery because they knew they weren't fighting with 100 other liquidators out there. They knew they were the source maybe for all the DVD players, or for all of the large screen televisions, or for all of the Norelco shavers. I mean, you could segment your market, and you drove the recovery up higher. And at the end of the day, what you as finance people help control, you can't really control the customer experience. You can talk about it, brag about it, tell them about 12 languages is a negative sell, things like that. You can help. In that middle space of dispositioning, you can help negotiate the contracts with your third-party partners. You can emphasize gain share programs. You can look for low-cost providers. that are good. But the other one, asset recovery, there's a lot of influence there. Talked to a recent a retailer recently who was getting lots of allowance programs, and they found by narrow targeting some of their liquidation that they could increase their recovery. Now think about this: the retailer's recovery might be 5 cents on a dollar on a good day. So if you can increase it to 6, 7, 8 cents on a dollar, you are printing money. Those were her terms. You're printing money because you're dealing with millions of dollars in returns goods. And so by increasing asset recovery 1 or 2 points, I mean, you tell me, the financial community, how much success can you have trying to improve the forward side margins versus the reverse returns margins are easier to address and attack. You have a faster chance of being a hero in the finance world on the return side than you do on the forward side, because the forward side also has to deal with market pressures and all of those competitive issues. But on the reverse side, it's a gold mine. It is literally a gold mine for financial people if you get connected with the operations people and the right organization to resell those goods. And by the way, forward salespeople, new good salespeople should not be selling returns goods. They're just not equipped to do it. You got to take them out of that environment. So, so there you go. A few tricks up the sleeve of what finance directors can influence in a big way. I appreciate the question. Thanks.
Love it. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate you.
Anything else? Anybody else?
I have another, hopefully a sufficiently quick question. First of all, Tony, thank you. I think what you just mentioned, also very similar. We have an analogy. It's almost like a soccer game, right? Where the most famous players like forwards, etc., versus the goalkeeper, the very modest person who is actually half of the team, basically. And it's kind of a position that nobody appreciates until actually come there. So it's like returns there. I have a quick question. You touched on this, but is the scams and the role of scammers in this, like how big of a part of a problem that is? Like when you think about returns, what share of that, like your estimate, is kind of driven by specifically targeting scams basically versus just general?
I think they're big, unfortunately, because it's a Ponzi scheme. It is literally a Ponzi scheme because they're giving you, let's say, $1 million for your inventory. Then they're going out and they're convincing someone that the value for it is somewhat higher because they're building it on, but we can give you credits for this. So they've given you a bank of trade credits and you are told to manage it. So then they go to hotels, they go to airlines, they go to advertisers, media advertisers. They negotiate to give you something at the high rate, but they've negotiated lower. So it's literally a Ponzi scheme. And it unfortunately happens over and over, but I will tell you, once a company learns the Ponzi scheme aspect, they generally get out of it. They don't do it again. But there's so many companies out there, it's easy to repeat the Ponzi scheme over and over with especially internet retailers right now, especially the apparel internet retailers. They have no idea what to do with returns. They just don't. We're not talking about the big companies, the Amazons and Walmarts and Targets. They're smart enough, but the manufacturers who don't want to take returns and the retailers who are selling online who have no idea, and the stuff starts piling up in the back room. Somebody comes along, makes them an offer, they're glad to take it. Somebody comes along and offers full value. It's a godsend until you find out that you almost need to hire somebody just to manage those credits. You can't do it. The same person cannot manage the credits and manage the liquidation. It's too much. Imagine telling all of your people suddenly that all travel accommodations have to be arranged through one source. The complexity of doing that. So there's nothing good that can be done in trading your inventory for any value with a barter system. You need to have a good partnership. So I'm not a fan of those programs. I've never seen one that works well, but I see a lot of them out there making offers. Yes.
Thank you, Tony.
Sure.
Thank you. So Tony, this was great. This was a great discussion, very insightful, very informative. Again, I encourage everybody to check out Tony's website, to connect with Tony, stay up to date on this topic. It is just such a huge discussion, a huge topic. Our next meeting is July 19th. It's on the Feng website, and also encourage you to sign up for that. And again, Tony, thank you again for your joining us tonight.
Very welcome, Michael. It's been great. I appreciate the questions. I know some of you will visit the website and join the community. I promise we'll make you a house account. We won't terrorize you to join as a member. We're just happy to have more in the community. Because Michael, I told you, I'm jealous. You have 37,000 members across the country, across the globe. We have 3,000 in our community. I think returns is kind of a bigger problem than just 3,000 individuals being involved in a community. So, so we really, companies, I'm sorry, 3,000 companies. So I'm glad to have more of you join us. And I hope to see some of you. We are actually doing an in-person conference in Las Vegas in September. So if you have nowhere else to go this year, we'll be in person at the Mirage at the end of September. With incredible speakers from Amazon, Home Depot, Walmart, many other organizations. We try to make it a high-class event. Mandy's asking if I can post. I don't know if I can do that, Michael. Can I put my link in from my page of LinkedIn? I can maybe get there, my account. Here we go. Let me try to post it in the chat.
In the chat.
Yeah, I'll try to put it in there. That should do it. But again, if you've got the spelling of my name anywhere, I think there's only 2 of us on LinkedIn that are Tony Sciarrotta. So a little easier name to find. But thank you, everyone, Mandy and everyone else. And really appreciate it. You guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing some of you in person someday at one of these events. Thank you so much.